Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar from Wiley and Sense About Science. My name is Hamid Khan, and I am the Senior Partnerships Coordinator at Sense About Science. We are an independent campaigning charity that champions the public interest in sound science and ensures that evidence is recognized in public life and policy making. During the next hour, we will be discussing trust in peer review, what it means and why it matters, as part of our program of events for Peer Review Week 2020. We know that your time is highly valuable, and we're grateful for you making the time to listen to our webinar, and we hope that you'll find it worthwhile. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping items that I need to run through. You have the opportunity to ask questions through the Questions tab at the top of the player. We will have about 20 minutes in the second half of the webinar to address these. You'll also notice several polls pop up during the presentations, and we would welcome your feedback on those. And you'll see those come up when I press the run button. These are all optional, so you don't have to do them, but it would be really, really great if you could give us your answers to those polls. A recorded version of this presentation will be available immediately after we finish today, and you'll be able to access it via the same URL that you're using now. Please feel free to share this link with your colleagues and networks, and you can do this via the social sharing icons at the top right of the screen. We've also added some attachments for you today, which you can access using the Attachments tab at the top of the player. These include the presentation slides, and there will also be a couple of resources that we will add that come out of the discussion. Today we have two speakers who will address a range of topics. They will include the nuts and bolts of the editorial process, including some of the challenges facing peer review and how new innovations in peer review may help to improve its trustworthiness. Our first speaker will be Charles Fox, the executive editor at the journal Functional Ecology, who will be talking about what happens to a manuscript when it is submitted and trying to open up that black box of peer review. And our second speaker will be Iratxe Puebla, Associate Director at ASAPbio, who will be discussing transparency. We were looking forward to having the health journalist Julia Belluz join us as well. Julia unfortunately found out just this morning that she wouldn't be able to make it, but she sends her apologies. And I'm confident that we're going to have a very lively and engaging discussion with the excellent Chuck and Iratxe as well. I will ask the speakers to take a few moments to introduce themselves, but before that, I want to stretch the system's legs slightly by doing a couple of polls. So I'd like to get a feel, first of all, for who is listening today. So you should see your first poll coming up in a moment. And that poll is asking, which of the following best describes your role? Select one of the following: senior researcher, early career researcher, editor, publisher, librarian, funder, or other. Okay, we've got a few answers in, so let's have a look at that. I'll share the results with you now. You should all be seeing those. So it looks like there's a really good mix here of people from different backgrounds and different roles, some at more senior level, some mid-career. Good to see lots and lots of early career researchers here as well, and plenty from the publishing and library fields represented as well. So welcome to you all. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is just do one more poll. And this time I'm going to ask you, what is your experience with peer review? So you should see that poll now. Here it is. What is your experience with peer review? And I think you should be able to select more than one here. I've acted as a reviewer for a journal. I manage the peer review process for a journal. I have read, posted peer review reports. I have signed my review report. I have contributed self-initiated reviews on a journal article or preprint. I'm involved in research on peer review, or none of the above. And I'll just give you 5 more seconds on that. And I'll close that poll. Right, let's take a look at the results. So you should be seeing those come up on your screen now. Looks like lots and lots of people are very closely involved here with managing the peer review process or contributing in some way to peer review, doing research on peer review, doing peer review, overseeing peer review. So it's really, really good to see, first of all, that there's a variety of backgrounds here, and secondly also that there's different levels of experience with peer review and experiences of peer review involved in this webinar today as well. So thank you for that. Thank you for your answers. It's good to test the system out there, make sure it's all working. I think all of that information from the polls is going to be really, really helpful as a starting point for our speakers as we dive into the discussion later. I'm now going to ask Chuck and Iratxe just to take 1 minute each to introduce themselves. Chuck, I'll go with you first. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, hi, thanks. My name is Charles Fox. I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky in the United States. I also work as an editor for a journal that's owned by the British Ecological Society. That journal is Functional Ecology, where I've been a senior editor at that journal for, well, gosh, now about 15 years. So I've been working in peer review and working in science publishing for quite a while. I've also been involved in the data organization Dryad. I was on their board of directors for many years. So yeah, that's basically my background and my experiences in publishing.
Thank you, Chuck. And now, Iratxe, come on down. It's over to you.
Thank you, and hi everybody. I'm Iratxe Puebla. I'm Associate Director for ASAPbio. We are a non-for-profit organization with a mission to drive openness and innovation in life sciences communication. We have two main areas of focus for our activities. One relates to the awareness and adoption of preprints in the life sciences, and the other is that we promote initiatives that drive transparency in peer review. Before my role here, I worked in publishing for 16 years for a couple of publishers, initially at Biomed Central and then PLOS. And as part of those roles, I was involved with models of peer review that involve an open peer review and also the implementation of actually a transparent peer review. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Iratxe, and welcome to both of you. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So without further ado, let's get on with the presentations. Chuck, if I could ask you to go first, and when you finish, just pass on to Iratxe.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak at this event. Let's see. Okay, slides are advancing there. So what I wanted to start by talking about, introducing this part of the event, is basically what do we mean when we're talking about peer review? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in at least with the general public, not so much in the scholarly community, but in the general public, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it means for a paper to be peer reviewed. So when you submit a paper to a journal, I've actually lifted this slide from Sense About Science themselves, so thank you for making this slide available. I use it in one of my courses on science publishing. And the point I want to make, I don't want to run through this slide in any detail, but I want to highlight a couple of key things. When you submit a paper to a journal, that journal is going to evaluate your paper, and the person or group of people that are evaluating your paper are journal editors. Every journal has a different editorial structure, but in general, most papers are going to be evaluated by one or two people at the editorial level. Sometimes it's a single individual that is going to be inviting reviewers and evaluating a manuscript. Other times there's a couple of levels of editors. The journal I work for has a senior editor who's going to do an initial sort of superficial evaluation of the paper and whether it's appropriate for the type of journal you've submitted it to. And then it's going to go on to another editor who has more expertise in at least the subject area, sort of general subject area of the paper. Not likely a specialist, but some general expertise in that area. The next step is that paper is going to, if it's suitable for the topic of the journal, is going to go out for peer review. that peer review is typically going to be done by 2 people or maybe 3 people. Some journals will actually invite a lot more. If you're submitting a paper to Science or Nature, some of our top tier journals, they're going to invite more than 2 people. But most journals typically are inviting 2 to 3 people, and sometimes they have trouble getting 2 or 3 people, and they might even make a decision about a manuscript with fewer reviewers than that. So I think a key point I wanted to make is that when you think about peer review, keep in mind that peer review means that a paper has been evaluated typically by an editor. That editor may be somewhat specialized in the subject area, or it might be a professional editor who handles a wide diversity of topics, and a handful of people who are at least relatively have interest and experiences relatively close to the topic of the manuscript. So there's a small number of people that are participating in peer review at most journals. Again, there are some exceptions to this. There are journals that invite a lot of reviewers, but most journals are relying on the input of just a couple of people in the peer review process. Of course, we all know peer review has a variety of challenges, and so I wanted to run through a few topics that I think are relevant to our discussion today about trust in peer review. The first of these is what is it that reviewers are doing? Reviewers have a dual mission. We should remember that reviewers are being invited by editors to provide feedback to editors who are then going to decide what to do with the manuscript. So one of the key roles of a reviewer is to advise the editor on what decision they should make and what they should require of authors. Of course, we also want reviewers to be constructive and improve papers. So reviewers are also being asked to provide critical feedback that will help the author improve their manuscript. So sort of a dual mission here: improve the paper, which benefits the authors and all of science, but also to provide objective advice to the editors. As we all know, peer review is really slow. This is one of the great complaints. It's one of the reasons that a lot of people put papers up, like during our current pandemic, work is showing up on preprint servers because it gets disseminated very quickly. I've even put a paper recently on a preprint server because I wanted to be able to share it very quickly. Peer review takes a long time. The reason peer review takes a long time is because there are a bunch of steps involved in peer review. As I've already mentioned, when you submit a paper to a journal, it's going to be evaluated by an editor. That editor is going to take a little bit of time to do that. They then need to recruit reviewers. Those reviewers need to actually review the paper, and then those comments are going to go back to the editor, who needs to reassess the paper. And if they're going to invite revision of a manuscript, there's a period of time where the paper will be in revision, and then it might go through another round of peer review, depending on how substantial the revisions are. And one thing to keep in mind is that almost all of this process is being done by unpaid reviewers and generally unpaid editors. There are journals, of course, that pay their editors some, but in a lot of journals, the editors and the reviewers are unpaid. At the journal I work with, we have about 100 associate editors who are inviting reviewers and managing manuscripts, and they're all volunteers. All of these people have other jobs. Participating in peer review is something they do as service. They do it because they're dedicated to improving the quality of the literature and serving the journals that they work for, but they're not being paid, and it's not their primary responsibility. Another thing about peer review is that it is actually hard for editors to find reviewers. This slide I have shows you the proportion of papers that had varying numbers of people decline to review when they're invited. So when you're invited to review, you typically nowadays will get an email, and you have an option of saying, yes, I'll review the paper, or no, I won't. Papers that had 0 declines meant they were able to get all the reviews they needed, typically, again, about 2, maybe 3 reviews, without anybody declining to review. But you'll notice that most papers, the overwhelming majority of papers, have at least some, if not many, people to decline to review. This is data for 6 journals in ecology and evolution over a 13-year time period. These include the journals owned by the British Ecological Society that I work with, plus one additional journal, Evolution, which is owned by the Society for the Study of Evolution. So what we're seeing here is lots of people declining to review, which of course adds time and work to the peer review process. the number of people declining to review has actually been increasing over time. So what I've got plotted here is the proportion of invited reviewers that agree to review at these same 6 journals of ecology and evolution. And what you'll notice is that if you go back to the early 2000s, that about 2/3 of people that were invited to review said yes, they would review a paper, and we were able to get 2 reviews. If you jump forward to 2015, and this, I don't know what the last couple of years have looked like, but I presume this trend is roughly continued, you'll notice that we're down to about half of people that we invite to review say yes. So editors are having to invite more people to review. The process of recruiting reviewers is taking longer now because more people are declining to review. I think that this increasing difficulty recruiting reviewers has some consequences for the peer review process and the quality of reviews that we get. One bit of data we know is that reviewers that are invited further apart in sequence at the journal Functional Ecology specifically tend to agree less often. So when editors are inviting reviewers, of course, they're trying to find the best people they can, the people that have expertise in a subject, that don't have conflicts of interest, have expertise, are going to be good at evaluating the content of the paper and helping improve the manuscript and provide good guidance to the journal. As people decline, of course, you have to widen the pool of people that you recruit to review. Well, that can be good in one sense because widening the pool gives you diversity and expertise, but also widening the pool might mean you're getting people that have less expertise and are less appropriate for reviewing the paper of interest. So I think that explains this general phenomenon that if you get the first 2 people you've invited to review, they're more likely to agree than if you get the first and the 8th person, for example, that you invited to review. We also know that the more people that decline to review, the greater proportion of people that decline to review, the less likely the reviews are overall going to be positive and the paper is going to be accepted by the journal. What I've got plotted here is the proportion of invitees agreeing to review for the same 6 journals that I've been using in my examples. And you'll see here there's a positive relationship between what proportion of people agree to review and the probability that the paper is eventually invited for revision by the journal. And almost all the papers we invite for revision are ultimately accepted. There could be a variety of reasons for this. It could be that people are just good at assessing the quality of a paper from the abstract. So if they think the paper doesn't sound good from the abstract, they'll decline to review it. And it turns out those papers are going to have a high probability of being rejected because they're not very good papers. It could be that we're getting less consistency in reviews. As more people decline to review, we're getting less expert reviewers, greater diversity of reviewers, and that lower consistency in reviews means that we're more likely to get negative reviews. We're more likely to get possibly unwarranted negative reviews and reject those papers. It could also be just that if it's difficult to find reviewers, editors get annoyed at papers. And I can tell you from personal experience that if you've invited 10 or 12 people and you can't get a reviewer and you have to keep finding more names, you get really tired of that very quickly. And maybe that influences editor decisions. We know that peer review also has a variety of biases. There's a lot written about biases in peer review, so I'm not going to talk about these today. I've actually written a fair bit about gender differences and geographic variation in outcomes and what some of the causes of those could be. But there's a variety of kinds of possible discrimination that can go into review. There's the possibility that people defer to more established scientists, more established scholars when doing peer review. Biases like this have led a number of journals to adopt double-blind peer review. So double-blind peer review is peer review where the authors that have written a study, written a manuscript, are anonymous to the reviewers. That's different than the traditional model of peer review, the most common model of peer review, where authors are identified to reviewers, but reviewers are anonymous to authors. Double-blind is where everybody in the process, generally except for the editors, everybody else is anonymous to who the participants are. There are also, my journal, Functional Ecology, is actually doing a randomized control trial right now where we are comparing the historic model of single-blind with double-blind peer review and asking a variety of questions about how it changes the peer review process. We want to see if outcomes of peer review are different between these two models. Is it more difficult to recruit reviewers when you use a double-blind model and reviewers don't know who the authors are? And a variety of other questions about both the cost of double-blind peer review and the potential benefits of double-blind peer review. So hopefully you'll see some papers on that coming in a couple of years as we complete that study, which has been running for about a year now. Another major issue in peer review, which of course is a key point of our discussion today, is the quality of peer review. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that most papers in peer review are reviewed by a small number of people, possibly an editor plus 2 volunteer reviewers. Sometimes the editor doesn't actually have expertise in the subject, and they're really the only reviewers are those 2 reviewers. Again, some journals will invite more than this, but the most common is about 2 reviewers per paper. So it's a good system. We know that it improves the quality of manuscripts, but it's far from perfect. One of the solutions to improving quality of peer review is open peer review. Now, I'm not going to talk about open and transparent peer review. That's the topic of Iratxe's talk after mine. She's going to talk about open process, open reports, open interactions between participants, and you'll see that there's a lot of benefits to open peer review, and I'm not going to cover those. What I do want to talk a little bit, though, about is open identity of reviewers. So one of the things that a lot of people call for is that reviewers should be known to the authors. One of the benefits of this is clearly that if people are known to authors, when your sort of public reputation is on the line, you tend to be more polite, you tend to be more constructive, and that should overall improve the process. I think Iratxe will probably talk about some of that. What I want to talk about, though, is what some of the cost might be of open peer review. One of the key things I think that we need to remember is that authors take criticism of their work personally. I like to think that I can take criticism of my work objectively because criticism is good. It improves the quality of my work, and I spend most of my life criticizing other people's work, my students, authors of papers to the journal. But I know that I take criticism somewhat personally because my life is very entwined with my work, and criticizing my work is in a lot of ways criticizing me. I think that's what most people do. We tend to take criticism of our work personally, some much more than others, but I think it's fairly universal that we do that. We also know in surveys that reviewers actually don't want to be identified to authors. If we ask people, would you prefer to be blind as a reviewer or to have your identity given to authors, overwhelmingly people prefer blind to open peer review. We have some data about that from my journal, and I'll show you in the next slide. We give authors and our associate editors, that pool of about 100 people who are recruiting reviewers and commenting on papers, we give them all the option to be anonymous. And overwhelmingly, they prefer to be anonymous. Only about 6% or so of reviewers sign their reviews and identify. They have that option. They're actually told when they submit the review that they can sign their review and be identified to authors. And only about 6% of people actually do that. And very few of our associate editors do that. Instead, at Functional Ecology, the senior editors are always the ones that sign the review and take responsibility for the decisions that are made. So I worry that open peer review could create some additional kinds of biases. And by open peer review, I mean non-anonymous peer review. I don't mean the commentary on papers. I think that's a different topic. But having non-anonymous peer review, I think, can create some new biases and reduce participation of some groups of people in the process. And I'll show you some data from Functional Ecology that is what leads me to think this. This is some data that shows the proportion of reviewers on the y-axis here that sign their reviews. And this is where reviewers are told you can sign your review and be identified to authors. If you do not sign your review, you will be anonymous. And what you see is that men sign their reviews much more often than women. Overall, the rate of signing is very low. Its average is about 6%. But men sign their reviews much more often than women. There's probably some geographic variation in here, but the sample sizes are not large enough to very clearly see that. We also know that which reviews people sign is actually not random. we see reviews submitted fairly often where people will say, I always sign my reviews, and then they sign the review, which is great, except it's commonly not true. Very few people sign all of the reviews. They tend to sign the reviews that they rated highly, but not the reviews that they rated low, and they tend to sign their longer reviews, not their shorter reviews. And I think they're signing their more constructive reviews. They're not signing the ones that are less constructive and shorter, and they're not signing the ones that are more critical. I think that suggests to us that people recognize there are consequences of being critical of papers, and they're opting not to sign the ones that they're critical of. They're only signing the ones that they're more positive about. So let me end by saying that review of papers before they're published, so review that is done by journals before they publish a paper, clearly improves the quality of papers and clearly improves the scholarly literature. But it is far from perfect. Peer review tends to be done by a very small number of people. We publish papers in journals that turn out not to be very good. We commonly reject papers that go on to be really important papers. Every journal has done this. Every editor who's been in their career for a while has made these kinds of mistakes. They're inevitable. It's not a perfect process. Post-publication evaluation work is critical. And there's a variety of ways to do post-publication peer review. In scholarly publishing, post-publication evaluation work is pretty standard. We're all reading the literature. We're all talking about the literature. We're writing about the literature. And so in the scholarly community, everybody knows that work is being criticized over time. Just because it's published doesn't mean it's great. It doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's important. It's the sort of body of work over time that accumulates, that leads that scholars to reach conclusions. And things that published can turn out to be disregarded in the future because they just turned out not to be very good. We all recognize that. The problem is the public is reviewing the literature as well. Journalists are following the literature as well. And they're not part of this sort of broader scholarly, long-term, multiple-year process of evaluating papers. So this normally takes place out of sight of the general public, and I'm hoping our next speaker, Iratxe, will give us some insights on some of the ways that this can be done that is not completely out of sight. So that's all I have to say. I'll stop there, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation, and thank you again for touching on the elements about open peer review. I think it provides a nice starting point for some of the items that I wanted to speak about today. I'm going to be mostly speaking about transparency in peer review. As I mentioned earlier, at ASAPbio, we work to promote initiatives that increase transparency in peer review. We view it as a very important element to build and drive trust in peer review. So I'll be touching on a few of the elements around transparency. And as you may have already noticed from the earlier speaker and myself, we are mentioning transparent peer review and also open peer review. And you may wonder what all of this means. There are a number of definitions and terms that have been used in the literature and across journals and publishers to refer to innovation in peer review that was looking to bring some elements of openness versus the perhaps more traditional peer review models. There is a very nice systematic review by Tony Rosella, which I saw there, where he looked at a number of the definitions and terms that were being used in the literature on different elements related to open peer review. And what he did is summarize 7 traits coming under the broader open peer review umbrella, covering open identities, open reports, and a number of other elements. For the purpose of what I'm going to be speaking today, I'm going to be mostly referring to the elements of open identities, what Chuck was mentioning about the fact that under this model, the reviewers sign the reports and the names are available to authors and also potentially readers. And the modality about posting the reviews, essentially open reports, the review reports could be then accessible with the publication in the journal. As I mentioned, there are a number of other modalities and innovation that also come under the open peer review umbrella. But for the purposes of today, I'll focus on the two open reports and open identities, which I think is probably the ones that we most often associate with open peer review. Something that I wanted to mention in terms of how things are evolving within the publishing space in relation to adoption of open peer review is that what we are seeing is there are more and more journals that are adopting some form of open peer review models. This is an analysis that was published just a few months ago by Wolfram and colleagues. What they did is they did an analysis on over 600 journals across different disciplines to identify which ones had at least published one article, which again, either some form of open identities or open reports as of 2019. And as you can see from the graph, there's been quite an increase in the number of journals that are adopting open peer review models. And interestingly, the trend has accelerated since 2017, because since then we have seen that the number of journals that have adopted open peer review has more than doubled. Another interesting trend that we can see from this analysis is that the adoption of open peer review actually varies quite a bit across different disciplines, and that the adoption of open review models is mostly driven by journals in the medical and natural sciences. So as I mentioned earlier, at ASAPbio, we have one of our areas of focus is to promote transparency in peer review, and the way that we have been doing this is that since 2018 we have supported the modality that involves the publication of the review, so the open reports modality of open peer review. In 2018, we posted an open letter where we called for journals to implement transparent peer review, so again, the publication of the review reports with the articles. And we were very happy with the response to this open letter. It was endorsed by over 370 journals. And actually, since then, again, all of those have either confirmed that they were already adopting the open reports modality, or they have now implemented it since signing the letter and published at least, again, one article with the reviews associated. The reason why we have this focus on the posting of peer review reports is that we see it as bringing many benefits for roughly everyone who is involved in the science communication cycle. If we think about this from the perspective of readers, the benefits are that essentially peer review is a scholarship. The reviewers are experts in their field who are often spending a lot of time providing their expertise to help improve the paper, make suggestions for the authors. And having the reviews available with the article once it's published provides readers, whether they are coming from the same community, again, perhaps specialized scholars, or the more general public, with more context for the published work than they would have without those reviews associated with the article. Having the reviews available also provides a fantastic resource for training. We often hear that from reviewers that essentially when they got started with reviewing, maybe they got their first invitation to review, they didn't undertake any specific training. They just kind of got on with it with perhaps a few guidelines from the journal, if they had any resources, but there is generally no formal training provided for reviewers. So having the reviews publicly available for other researchers, it's a great resource that they can refer back to see how to potentially frame the review and make it as useful as possible for the authors and the journal. There are also benefits for reviewers associated with the posting of the review reports. The earlier speaker has spoken a little bit about this, but there are some studies who have looked at the quality of the reviews and the different models. And there's been some results showing that under open peer review, again with the posting of reports, there is an association with higher quality in the review comments, and that they tend to be more balanced, so more constructive reviews. There's also been quite a bit of discussion recently about the fact that it would be valuable to give credit for reviewers for their activity. This is an activity that, again, takes a lot of time and effort from scholars, and it often happens in a manner that is not necessarily in the spotlight and is not recognized. So having those reviews available provide a tangible proof of that activity and facilitates providing credit to reviewers. There are additional benefits in the posting of the peer reviews also for their journals. Having the reviews with the articles is a very clear proof of the fact that the journal undertook peer review and of the quality of that process. Many journals will have labels that indicate that their content has been peer reviewed, but obviously it is not the same to have a little label that says peer reviewed compared to having the actual reviews that anyone can go and read and scrutinize, and they will give a sense as to what the process was before the article was published. There's been also, as some of you may have heard, the phenomenon of the so-called predatory journals over recent years. There are some journals operating under probably low-quality review, or actually not even undertaking peer review. So if there are any concerns about the peer review process for a journal, what best proof then to have the actual reviews that inform the process publicly available? Having the reviews available also makes the journal decisions more transparent. The peer review process is also is sometimes referred to as a black box. Essentially, the authors will submit a paper through the manuscript platform, and eventually a letter comes back from the same platform. And there are only a few people involved in the process in between, and it's not always necessarily clear beyond that small circle as to what took place to inform the decision. If we post the peer review reports with the article, the information that was used by the editors to help them reach their editorial decision will be available for scrutiny. So again, it opens that black box of peer review. And then I think that an important element of the publication of the peer review reports is the fact that they help build trust in science as a whole. Again, having the reviews provides information as to what the assessment was for individual papers, and what the quality control steps were before the articles reached the moment of acceptance and publication. I think we are at particularly now at a stage where it is relevant, and there is a huge opportunity to educate many beyond the scholarly circles as to how the research communication cycle works. And again, this is something that can be really added to through the publication of peer review reports. If we want to educate the public as to how the review process works, what's best than to have the proof of the actual reports that they can scrutinize. And finally, something that I feel quite passionately about is the fact that I really think that we need to do more research on peer review as a process. I was very happy to hear about the randomized controlled trial that is taking place at Fact Journal. I think that's fantastic. We haven't done enough well-designed studies that tell us more as to what modalities of peer review work, which ones may work better, which ones address bias, etc. And if we want to really facilitate this research on peer review as a process, if we have the peer review reports already available, that's already a lot of material for researchers to use and to start building that evidence around the process as a whole. So again, we feel that having the reviews available facilitates driving trust in science. And then I just wanted to touch on a few things, again, on the same subject of transparency. We may touch on the elements about signing, etc. I'll be happy to discuss that after the talks. But I wanted to mention a few things as to how we can all support transparency in peer review. As I mentioned, there are benefits for all of the actors in the process. So it is also relevant for all of the actors in the process to take part in this. If you happen to be a reviewer and you want to support transparency in peer review, you can prioritize reviewing for journals that offer transparent peer review. Similarly, you, as an author, you can perhaps advocate at the journals where you submit or if you're an editorial board member, advocate for transparency. And if that's an optional choice for authors, obviously opt in for transparent peer review. There was a reference to this in the earlier presentation. I think that providing public comments on papers, and this could be either after publication at a journal or, for example, at a preprint, it is a great way of supporting transparency. There are some journals that support post-publication peer review through commenting features on articles, so that's an option. I think that the commenting on preprints is a particularly relevant activity right now. It's one that can bring many, many members of the community into the review process, independent on whether they get invited by editors or not. And it's also an opportunity to, again, provide further context for work that may be preliminary. So it's a great opportunity to again, participate in the process and gain skills in peer review. And then finally, as I mentioned, I really think that we need further research into the review process. So if you have opportunities to participate, either because there are, again, studies at journals or broader activities, please support those. We need that evidence to really make the process as efficient and trustworthy as possible. Right, and with that, I just wanted to thank my colleague Jessica Polka, who is the executive editor at ASAPbio. She drives a lot of the transparency and peer review initiatives for ASAPbio, the support of our funders, and obviously thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much to both of you for those fantastic, informative presentations. I think they've really set the scene for a very interesting discussion to come. And on that note, I want to kick things off actually with a couple of questions. We've been getting some fantastic questions in from some of the folks who are listening. And I want to ask the first question, kind of a combination between my own question and a question from the audience. So the question is this, or the first part of the question is, we heard in Chuck's talk that it's difficult to find reviewers, and we heard about some of the challenges that presents to completing a quality peer review. The first part of the question is, what consequences does this have for trust in peer review? What are your thoughts about potential solutions? And the second part of that question actually comes from Panagiotis Palogiannis from the University of Sassari, who said, because reviewers are not paid for doing peer review, what do you think of paying them to do so? He says he believes it would become easier to find peer reviewers if you paid them, and the whole process would get faster. So how do you feel about that as a potential solution to the lack of reviewers? Can I come to Iratxe first on that?
Sure. So I start with the first of the questions, which, if I understood correctly, is about the difficulty in finding reviewers. How is it getting more difficult over time? What are the consequences and potential solutions? That's an interesting point, because I think that it's probably a common theme among many editors. I worked as an editor for many years, and it became an increasingly common theme about the difficulty to find reviewers. I think that from my perspective, one of the big issues around this is that we are seeing a bottleneck between those who are producing research and those who are actually participate in review. And there are imbalances there related to career stage, more senior versus more junior researchers, for example, different participation in peer review from different countries, etc. And what I think we would need to look into is to try to tackle some of those imbalances and try to bring some of those underrepresented groups more into the peer review activities. There is not necessarily an easy solution to this, and I know that there are some journals that are putting in place some mechanisms, perhaps through mentoring more junior reviewers, so they can participate with help from another more senior editor. Some peer review training modalities. For me, one interesting approach, as I was mentioning, which relates to preprints, is that in the commenting and review of preprints, you do not need to have an editor ask you to review. It can be self-initiated. And I think that if we see more adoption in that, it will actually build the reputation of some more junior researchers as being good reviewers, and then make them qualify for the reviewer pool for some journals. So that may bring some solutions. I think there was a question about the consequences for trust, and obviously I think there are some potential consequences there, in the sense that what you want is to have the best possible evaluation for the paper, so that, again, you can trust the quality of the review. And what I think we need to do moving forward is, again, to try to bring more participation from varied perspectives and backgrounds into the review process, and particularly from those who are currently underrepresented.
Can I just add a couple of small comments to that? I completely agree that one of the problems with recruiting reviewers is often identifying a pool of people that are really not very known to editors. So particularly early career researchers, they could be later stage graduate students or recent graduates who are just starting to publish. As an editor, if you don't have a presence online that we can find, it's going to be hard to identify you as a prospective reviewer. And the primary presence we use is your publication record, your publishing in a subject area. So we at Functional Ecology encourage people that we invite. If you can't review, we encourage you to identify a student or postdoc in your lab that you might co-review with. We also are aware that there are resources in ecology and evolution, at least, where there are websites where people can go and sign up to be prospective reviewers in the future. I had a second point, and I actually forgot what my second point was going to be. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chuck and Iratxe, for that answer to the first question. The next question actually was kind of related, and I think Iratxe mentioned that in her first answer. But just about this idea of preprints. The COVID pandemic has obviously seen this huge increase in the amount of research that is posted as preprints. What do you think are the new opportunities and challenges that have come out of that? And how do you see preprints evolving versus the traditional style of journal peer review? Maybe Chuck, if we go to you first on that.
Sure. I think in general, preprints are great in that you get your work out quickly, you get it out before it might end up behind a paywall if you have a subscription journal, for example. It's a great way to disseminate your work quickly into a broad community. The real challenge with preprints, I think, is not so much for the scholarly community, because the scholarly community is going to be evaluating that work critically, and over time, that work is going to either rise to the top as influential or not. The problem is that when the general public, whether they be journalists or other members of the public that are reading those preprints, and you don't really have the skill set to evaluate in great detail the quality of the work that's being presented. I don't really know what the solution to that problem is, beyond saying that just because work is not peer reviewed doesn't mean it isn't great, because most of the work that ends up, or a large proportion of the work that ends up in peer reviewed journals, starts off in maybe as a preprint or circulated among colleagues as unreviewed work. And so hopefully it's better when it gets to a journal form because it's gone through extensive peer review. But on the other hand, people can put anything on a preprint server. The criteria for posting on a preprint server are pretty low. So, putting the work into context of that other researcher's research and other work being done at the time is, of course, what you need to be able to do. But it's hard to do if you don't have the skill set of a specialist in the field. So I'm not really answering the question, but I think preprint servers in general are very good for the scholarly community, but they create a novel set of challenges for journalists who are not experts in a subject area.
Thank you. And Iratxe, would you agree with that?
Yeah. No. I wanted to add to the comments about the issues related to the preprints being available to the public and maybe even the media. I think that's a very timely subject, and it's actually one that we've been discussing quite a bit at ASAPbio. We actually ran a survey across a broad range of stakeholders earlier in the summer. And interestingly, we asked respondents to tell us what they perceived as the benefits of preprints, but also the concerns. And very clearly, potential risk of premature media coverage on work on a preprint came very clearly for all of the stakeholders as the top concern. So I think it is a challenge that we can agree that is relevant. That there are a number of things that potentially can be done around it, in the sense of developing guidelines for researchers, for example, to report their research responsibly. And I think that this really applies not only to what they post on preprints, but also on their papers. I mean, there's been some studies that show that even in peer-reviewed publications, there can be perhaps claims that are overblown, not necessarily intentionally, but in terms of how the claims are made in the paper. So I think that there is an opportunity there to develop guidelines for researchers and also for journalists, so that they can also provide some nuance if they are writing a story about a preprint. Something that, again, coming back to the commenting on reviews, I think it ties to this element of providing contextualization of the posted research for those readers who may not be a specialist in the field. If I am a member of the public and I'm not an expert and I come to a preprint, and there are comments associated with it that are already posting questions or saying, actually, you need to perhaps take these conclusions with a little bit of caution, that will help me understand better how I should either interpret or use their work in the preprint. So I think that commenting and review on the preprints is particularly helpful to address this type of challenge. And as I was mentioning earlier, it brings also benefits in terms of having broader participation in review. And also from my perspective, the element of, if you are commenting and reviewing on a preprint, you are commenting on the science and not necessarily of whether there is a fit for this journal or not, etc. We have seen quite a bit, I would say, of uptake in the commenting of reviews, specifically for COVID-19. As you may expect, a lot of early research related to the pandemic was coming up as preprints, and everyone, was being disseminated very quickly. So that also attracted commentary. I think that if we see a continued growth in the adoption of preprints, we'll also see an increase in activity around review of preprints. And actually, there have been already some initiatives to support this type of review. There is a platform called Pre-Review, which is specifically dedicated for rapid reviews of preprints. It's publicly available, so anyone can post. And we have also seen the development of what we call overlay journals, which actually coordinate the review of preprints. Actually, their focus is more on the peer review element. There was one, for example, called Rapid Reviews COVID-19 by MIT person UC Berkeley, that was created a few months ago specifically for COVID-19 preprints. So I think that if we continue to see this trend in preprint adoption, probably we'll see more preprint commentary as well, and hopefully that will open again the door for more innovation and potentially ways of perhaps bringing some of that commentary on the preprint also into the journal processes in the future.
Can I add two very small points?
Sure.
One that I think it will be useful for journalists or anyone from the public reading papers on preprint service to know is that it's a really common criticism in peer review when a paper is submitted to a journal and is reviewed by the journal. It's a pretty common criticism of editors to make that the novelty and importance of work is being exaggerated in the paper. Everybody is marketing their work, especially if they're submitting to high-profile journals. They're marketing their work as novel and important because that's one of the criteria we evaluate pretty strongly in whether to publish your paper. And people tend to exaggerate that. And, of course, in a preprint server, it hasn't gone through review where somebody has said that to an editor and the editor has gone to the authors and say, you need to tone this down. You're exaggerating the importance of your work. And a second point is I think having post-publication review, whether it would be on a preprint server or in a journal, post-publication evaluation of papers through commenting, I think it's a great thing to do but we also need to keep into account there needs to be moderation of it. We've all seen what happens in commenting boards on all kinds of contexts. If commenting is just sort of open to anybody and anything, it very quickly deteriorates to not being useful. So there has to be some criteria for comments to be constructive and helpful, and that's a real challenge of you end up getting into sort of legal problems with moderation, you being responsible for comments that are made if you're a journal that has a forum for this. And so there needs to be mechanisms in place to make sure that conversation stays constructive and a quality conversation.
Thank you, Chuck and Iratxe, for your answers to that question. We've got a few minutes left. So what I want to do, actually, just before we sign off, is to do another poll. And in this poll, I want to get, or rather, once we've done this poll, I want to get Chuck's and Iratxe's thoughts on it. So that's why I want to do it with a few minutes to spare. So what I'm going to do is I'm opening that poll now. Here we go. And the question is, during COVID-19, there has been unprecedented public attention on science and the latest research findings. How do you think that trust in peer review has evolved in the context of COVID-19? And please select one. Do you think that trust in peer review has increased? Trust in peer review has remained the same? Trust in peer review has decreased? Or you don't know? Quite a tricky question, so I'll give you a few more moments to think about that. And I'll close that poll now, gathering the poll results. And I'm just going to share those with you. Here we go. Looks like most people there saying that they think trust in peer review has decreased. Slightly fewer saying that it has remained the same. And very, very few people saying that trust in peer review has increased. Iratxe, what do you make of those results? Is that what you expected to see?
That's interesting. Not necessarily, but I can understand the context. I imagine it may be linked to the fact that in the context of the pandemic, there has been a few high-profile situations of papers published that then came under scrutiny and even led to retractions. I can imagine that may have played a role in the perception. I think that from my perspective, when I'm looking at this more broadly, I think that for those who perhaps were less involved in the inner circles of publishing and the scientific process, the pandemic has really, again, provided an opportunity for education and providing more information to the broader public as to, again, how science works. Chuck provided a very nice summary there and saying essentially there is no single magic bullet of one publication. Science operates in smaller steps where different studies build on each other, etc. And I think that what the pandemic has given us is an opportunity to, again, bring that into the spotlight and an opportunity to provide more nuance as to how science works, but also what peer review involves and how it works and how we may have some papers that have not been peer reviewed and some that had. And also maybe emphasize the fact that it is a very important step in the process. That it doesn't mean that because something has been peer reviewed, it makes the conclusions of that particular paper true and untouchable. That there needs to be this iterative process and that science builds again on itself and on further validation, etc. And that this scrutiny is really part of the process. So I'm hoping that we'll come out of this with some greater understanding, again, across the broader public. For those in publishing specifically, I hope that, as I was mentioning, what we will see is further innovation brought into the process to try to make the peer review as solid and efficient as we can make it.
Thanks. And Chuck, if you could come in very quickly in about 45 seconds on that.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything she said. I think there's a couple things happening. Of course, I'm in the United States, so we're seeing this constant assault on science. So I'm not surprised by the poll results. But I also think what's happening is we're in a pandemic where everybody's sort of rushing to get their work done, and rushing is having some cost in that the quality of work that's coming out is often lower. But also what we're seeing is the public is seeing sort of very sort of out in the open what happens in science behind the scenes. We have lots of ideas that tend to be wrong. Scientists propose ideas all the time that tend to be wrong, and their reputations don't suffer from that because that's the process of science. But now it's very public with public consequences, and people don't realize that this is just a normal process. Our views are going to change as we get evidence. So we got people that are marketing their work. They're trying to get it out really fast. They're trying to get credit for that work. Some of it's not as good, but mostly science is working as it should, and it's really more of a perception problem than an actual problem with science itself.
Thank you, Chuck. We're going to leave it there because it is now 4 o'clock BST. So I want to thank everyone for listening today. Thank you to our speakers for sharing all of your ideas. We hope that everyone who is listening found some valuable information that will help you all with your future research. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and is available through the Wiley Author Services channel on Workcast or via the URL that you're using now. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time. Please do check back for forthcoming webinars as well. If you would like to speak with any of us further, our details are available. And for now, thank you very much. Stay safe and